we're in part 3 now. Part 2, we talked about those dragon skeletons, and we read a biblical passage about the Leviathan.
Yep.
Which was really cool. You got to go look and see that thing.
Job 41.
Yep. That was just a crazy thing.
Yeah, sure is.
It's really cool, though. So maybe people can check that out. So part 3, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about fossils, dinosaur fossil footprints, which can be more important than bones. The reason being, they don't move around, where bones can be moved around. Sometimes they rot. Sometimes they get broken up. You got some pieces, but not the full thing. Dinosaur footprints are just what used to be mud, or a dinosaur stepped in, which has now been fossilized, and it's solid rock. So the evidence is right where it was when it began, and nature hasn't messed with it other than maybe a little mild erosion or something or other.
Right. Well, we got some cool pictures, and
we got some really good stuff here.
Good stuff.
And you'll have to forgive it if it looks like I'm going down, because I am coming down, down, down. We got a problem with the chair here, and it looks like I'm still going down. So if I end up down at the same edge as the table, it's no problem.
Here, I'll adjust this other one.
Okay.
There, now you're back up.
Okay, very good. Yeah, we'll deal with it. That's what happens when
I'll get that fixed next week.
Perfect. Okay.
This is live stuff right now. It's not rehearsed.
No, this is not rehearsed.
We just come in and we're prepared. We do what we do, and we
come what may, whatever happens, and we just deal with it.
Editing, and we have fun doing this.
It's a good time, and hopefully everybody can get some learning out of this.
Yep, good stuff.
Okay. The first one we're going to look at here is an iguanodon track, and this was found in Morrison, Colorado. And there you can see it's one of those 3-toed plant-eating deals.
Yeah.
And you can see what a footprint looks like in this particular one. And I'm just showing that just to show it. This is would not have been 100 million years old, but this is fossilized foot track. All fossils were made at the time of the flood. And the reason a fossil is made is because it gets covered over. So if you got mud out in the back of your house and you step in the mud puddle, your footprint will remain there until it rains again or something like that, or whatever, and then it goes away, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing happened in ancient times too. But this was something that happened at the flood because this dinosaur stepped in the mud, and then it was immediately covered over by other earth, sand, dirt, rocks, mud, covered over it. And now later we come and we find these things in a fossilized state. And that's how come we still have them. This is not 100 million years old, right? This is just something that happened at the time of the flood. So this would be in the neighborhood of 6,000-ish years ago. Okay. So the next one is the sauropod track. This was found in Texas. Same thing. You got one of these dinosaurs that ate plants and trees and so on. You can kind of see a little whisk broom there or something next to it.
Yeah.
So you can get the idea of the size of this. The slide after this is a 3-toed carnivore, a T-Rex or similar. And you can see the 3 toes there in the rock. And you can see there's a quarter there on the rock. So you can kind of see the size. Fairly large foot track. Yeah, very, very cool. Cool track there, too.
It is.
Yeah. Now, this next one is another 3-toed dinosaur you see there. And I think if you want to just go right on through to the next one, is we got another example of some dinosaur tracks. Two steps there.
That's a good one.
Yeah, a pretty good one. So you can see how it was walking along.
Yeah.
Now, these would have been made at the time of the flood. Now, they even walking in the mud from the rising flood waters, literally, is when you would have had these made. So this animal would have died literally in the flood of Noah. These are not tracks that were made 100 million years ago.
Yeah.
That is entirely false. And in fact, there's not even any evidence that supports that. And that's a hypothesis, somebody's idea, and it's been brought along because you want to bolster the evolutionary theory, but it is not true, and there's no evidence for that. If you want the real truth is biblical. It's a biblical truth, and this fits in the biblical model.
Right.
Okay, so the next one is the Turnage Patton Trail. And I think this is another one with Don Patton. You see him there on the right. And this is in the Paluxy River, Glen Rose, Texas. And you see the dinosaur tracks walking along the river, or what, at least what used to be a river. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see how long this is. And I think it says on there, if you can read it, it's 157 tracks, and it's 500 feet long. This is the second longest continuous dinosaur track in the world.
Wow.
Right here that we found. But you see this material on the left, and then how it kind of drops off to where the tracks are. That's why the tracks are still there, because they were covered for a long, long time.
Protected them.
And you had a flood that came through, and it broke some of this up. And you said, hey, wait a second, there's some tracks down here. Now, all these tracks are solid rock. It is not soft mud. These are just solid rock. And so they said, hey, somebody's found these, and they said there's some tracks under here. And then they were able to bring in some tractors and whatever, and to cut. This is called overburden, is what it's called, and to cut some of that off, so you could see the tracks. And they followed them down as far as they could until they ended, or they couldn't find them anymore. And so that's what you have there. So very fascinating.
Yes, it is.
So these next ones that we're going to see are really interesting, because now we are going to see something that there is no such thing. Science says there's no such thing and is an impossibility. Yet we see them in rock, solid rock, from around 6,000 years ago. The absolute proof. So this is very, very fascinating. Now this next one is known as the Morris track. And this is a human footprint that's in solid rock now, because at one time it was soft, and this would have been made at the time of the flood. And this is in Cretaceous limestone. Now, Cretaceous limestone, the evolutionary scientists say, is 100 million years old. You see, there's a very big problem here, because you have a human footprint in limestone that is, they say, 100 million years old. There were no people 100 million years ago. You only had dinosaurs according to the evolutionary model.
Right.
And here you have a human footprint.
But that's just one, right?
One human footprint, right? But
right, we only have one, right?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was
Yeah,
going to
you
say,
know what's going on here.
One can be, disputed.
Yeah. Now the next slide.
Up here.
The next slide is the same track after it was destroyed.
Okay.
And it was destroyed. Someone came along and smashed it.
What?
The rock, smashed the rocks to make the footprint go away. Now, what you find when you're dealing with creationism, you find this all the time. This happens all the time. The evidence will be destroyed. It'll be stolen if it's stealable, or it'll be moved if it's movable, or hidden if it's hideable. Right? This is what happens.
Found this track. And somebody come
and then
along.
it was published as a human footprint in 100 million year old Cretaceous limestone, and somebody else came along that wants the evolutionary theory and says, "Oh, it's going to destroy it, so we don't have the problem anymore."
That's terrible.
And it's destroyed.
They just hate the thought of that being true.
Yeah, it's so bad that they got a contest going on.
Yeah,
and it's like creationists against evolutionists, and in contests like sporting events, oftentimes anything goes.
Yeah.
If you got to cheat, you cheat.
Well, at least they got pictures and proof of it.
Yeah, we got pictures and documentation of the entire thing. And so they were unsuccessul, except that they destroyed the actual artifact. But we have evidence, we have it recorded, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, this next one is the Riles track. This was found in Glen Rose in 1930. In Cretaceous, I'm sorry. The last one I was just talking about was the Riles. We got to get up to speed on our pictures here. But anyway, this is good. No, it's good. Stay right there.
Okay, so that one's the Riles?
That's the Riles there. This is known as the coffee track. I should have looked up. I would have seen it. This is known as the coffee track. And what you have here is a human footprint on the right. And on the left is a baby human footprint. And in the next slide, you can see it a little better because it's reversed. It's reversed. You can kind of see. You got a little baby foot and an adult foot on a track. This was discovered in 1934 in Stinnett, Texas. This is in Permian. This is what this is on, by the way. These tracks, Permian limestone. Permian limestone is dated, according to evolutionary science, 225 million years ago. So you have Permian limestone with human footprints, 225 million. They say 225 million years ago. Now, where the difference is they are incorrect about the dating.
Yeah.
They date it into millions of years in order to make evolution work. Because evolution doesn't work unless it's millions and millions of years old. This is Permian limestone. That part is true. But where they have wrong is that Permian limestone was made at the time of the flood 6,000 years ago. It was not made 225 million years ago. And here you have human footprints.
What is, just out of curiosity, just kind of throw a question at you. What's their answer for something like this? Because there's a baby track in a Permian limestone.
Right. I don't know what the answer is on this very track. I've seen it before, but I forget what it is now. But usually they will say something like, it's been faked. There's tracks there, but as far as we know, they were carved. Stuff like that.
It doesn't fit their model.
If it doesn't fit their model, they say it's incorrect. They say the creationists are lying about what they found. They say the creationists made it.
Carved it, whatever.
Or faked it in one way or another. And when they go out and see the real tracks for themselves, sometimes the tracks end up being destroyed.
Yeah, gotcha.
So it's a really bad situation, and it's because everybody is against Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Except those who follow him and hear his voice.
Well, these don't bother me much.
The truth is within you, brother. It doesn't bother me either.
They're pretty cool.
And it's great to know the real truth about these things.
Well,
because we're told lies.
That's right. The truth brings peace.
Yep, it sure does.
In my opinion, especially over this kind of stuff.
You might even say the truth sets you free.
That's right.
Right?
Right on.
Yeah. Okay. The next one is known as the Zapata track. This was found in New Mexico in 1987. This is also in Permian limestone, 225 years old, they say. And the footprint looks kind of goofy with kind of spread out toes and whatever.
Yeah.
But if the person is running or walking, it changes how your foot is. And so the foot does look like this in some mud. Now, this looks like fresh mud.
Yeah.
It's not. It's solid rock. But we sprayed it.
Okay.
It's been sprayed. I should say it's been sprayed with the sprayer so that it brings the track out more so you can see it. But it's actually solid rock.
We didn't actually go there and spray.
Yeah, we didn't spray it. Yeah, exactly. So, okay. The next one is known as the Caldwell track. This is a giant footprint.
Yes, it is.
It was discovered in 1964. And in fact, it was at the 1965 World's Fair as a giant human track that's been found. It since has disappeared, and this is one of these things I tell you that happens time and time again. Nobody knows where this track is anymore. It's just gone. It was stolen or destroyed or something. But it hasn't been seen since the 1965 World's Fair. Or maybe it was seen since then, but that's the last time it was on display, I should say.
Okay.
But it's disappeared since, because this picture here doesn't look like 1965. So obviously it was around after that, but sometime it's disappeared.
Okay.
The next one is known as the Burdick track. This was found in the Paluxy River near Glen Rose, Texas. This rock is a Middle Cretaceous rock, dated at over 100 million years old, according to the evolutionary scientist or geologist would say. This is 100 million year old rock. They say that this footprint was carved by the Indians, and that's why it's there. But that's how come you see the cuts in the rock.
Yeah.
Because if they could cut it and look inside, you could see if it was pushed down.
Evidence of compression.
Yep. Or if it was just carved, and we found that it was in fact pushed down.
Yeah.
So it actually was a real print. Whoever made this print was somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 9 feet tall and weighed in the neighborhood of 400 to 700 pounds.
Wow.
So now you have another thing coming in. You have human footprints at the time of the flood. And you have giant human footprints at the time of the flood, which also is a biblical thing. Going back to Genesis 6 and these evidences of these giants at the time, the Bible says were on the earth at that time. So now you have evidence of man being around in the early days. You have evidence of dinosaurs being around in the early days, and also men and dinosaurs interacting in the early days. The evidence is starting to come together.
Sure is. It's interesting that, you mentioned all kinds of different layers that these tracks are in. It's not just one freak thing.
No.
They're all different kinds of layers, that they're all different kinds of dates.
Yes.
It's interesting.
That's right. Now we're going to look at some...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Seems to make sense.
Yeah.
If you think about how the flood happened.
Well, the only story where the evidence lines up, the archaeological evidence, the historical evidence, and the biblical evidence, is with the flood of Noah. All of the evidence comes together beautifully. The evolutionary story turns out to be nonsense in numerous areas. It's the biblical creation story that makes sense and where the evidence all comes together. The biblical creation story. That is where your truth comes in. It scares a lot of people because they don't want the Bible to be true.
Yeah.
And the thought of God scares them and so on and so forth. And that's understandable. But mostly that's because people do not understand the nature of God, and they think that God wants to destroy them because they've done something bad or something, which isn't the case. But people don't know it unless you study and pray and you read the Bible, and you can discover these things, that the Lord loves us all. He's not willing that any should perish.
Right.
And even if you've done lots of bad things, that's okay.
Yeah.
But people get stuck in these things. And so when you see this evidence that the book of Genesis, the Bible, and the evidence all correlates for the flood of Noah and these dinosaurs and giants and even being around at the same time, it's fascinating and wonderful because you have real answers to real questions people have.
That's right. That's why we're doing this.
That's why we're doing it.
That's right. Exactly why we're doing
Yep.
it. The only reason we're doing it.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Now, the next one I want to show is some bones.
Okay.
Now, this is known as Malachite Man. This is about 20 miles south of Moab, Utah. Now, this is in an open pit copper mine. And they found these bones. Now, these were discovered in 1971, and there was also some more found in 1990. Human fossilized bones in Dakota sandstone in Utah. And now these were found 50 feet down, right? So you got the top layer way up on top. 50 feet down is where they found these bones. Now 50 feet down is where you find the dinosaurs. So you have human bones in this exact same strata, in the exact same age rocks as dinosaurs. This is a major problem if you're an evolutionist and you hold to the means of your theory. And this is a beautiful correlation if you hold to the creationist story.
Right. You won't see this in the chart.
No, you're not going to see this in the chart, that's for sure. Now, they found 10 humans in this thing, men, women, and children. And the bones are a real green color. If you want to go to the next slide, you can see it a little better. There's a femur bone there. And see how green it is. Yes. And that's because of the chemicals in the copper that have changed the bone into a green color.
Yeah.
So anyway, the next one is also the malachite site, and it shows a knee and a hip. And I think this is actually two specimens that are just closely together. This is not one specimen. But anyway, you can see obviously human bones. And also in the exact same strata and age rock as the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get to the really good stuff. We'll save the best for last. You ready for this?
Yes, sir.
Now this stuff is good. Now the next slide is the Taylor Trail overburden. So let's take a look at that. Here you have the overburden being removed because the track's about 12 inches underneath this stuff they discovered. So you can see how they're removing it so you could get down to where the tracks were. Because since the flood happened, you got 8, 12, 15 inches of stuff that's been over the top.
Right.
Now the flood was so traumatic. In some areas, it took off a mile of soil, like in the Grand Canyon. You get all those peaks and everything, and they're all exactly at the same level. That was the top at one time.
Yeah.
And then it got eroded from the flood. In some places, only just a few inches. But here you have a few inches of flood added on top. And so we can have these tracks that we're going to see here. So the next one is where you can see they're sandbagging in order to keep the water back so they can examine these tracks. These are human tracks. It looks like somebody walked along in the mud there. Sure, but actually what that is that's solid rock. And it's wet, and it looks like mud. But it's not mud. It's solid rock, solid human footprints that were made at the time of the flood. This person, whoever made these footprints, would have died in the flood of Noah.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is.
Now, we've seen dinosaur tracks, and we've seen some human tracks, all dating at the same time, all in the same strata, all in the same dating of the rocks. Now we're going to see if there's any evidence of humans and dinosaurs occupying the same space. If you got that, Now you really got something, because these aren't bones. These are tracks that were solidified in exactly the place they were when they were made 6,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay, the first one. This is known as the let's see here. I'm gonna make sure I get this right one. I think this is I don't have the name of this, but I think this is the Taylor Trail.
Okay.
And what you have here is you see the big dinosaur tracks going from the bottom left over to the right. Those are dinosaur tracks. But right down the middle, where the guy is walking down there, those are human tracks. So you have dinosaur footprints in solid rock and human footprints in solid rock made exactly at the same time. This is utterly impossible according to the evolutionary time scale. Utterly impossible. Dinosaurs were 65 to 100 million years before mankind. That's what they say. We're being lied to, because there you saw dinosaur and human prints in the same place at the same time.
Crossing each other.
That's because dinosaurs were alive, and they were alive at the time of the flood of Noah. And beyond, actually, the other evidence shows, even beyond the flood of Noah, which tells you what? There may have been some dinosaurs, at least, on the Ark of Noah even. So very fascinating.
We did a flood show, 3-part series on that. We go into all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's right.
So, good show.
Yeah, check that out, because you'll see lots of really great stuff on there.
Yeah.
So this next one is known as the McFall print. And what you have is a human footprint kind of on the right there. You see it. And then above the human footprint, you see a 3-toed track. Mm-hmm. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's a dinosaur track. And then on the left, you can also see a 3-toed track over on the left there. Now, the next one superimposes one. If you want to go to the next one, this shows you the dinosaur tracks. You see how they're kind of superimposed?
Right.
So you can see better. 3-toed dinosaur tracks. Now, the next one will show the human footprint superimposed.
I'm getting it here.
Okay, yeah, it's no problem. And you'll see that we have, there it is there on the right, the human footprint.
Look at that.
The dinosaur has come along and walked across the mud, and then a human came along and walked across the mud and stepped right in the dinosaur track. And then they were killed by the flood when the floodwaters came, and it was forever fossilized exactly in place, just like that. So you have humans and dinosaurs at exactly the same time in rock that they say is hundreds of millions of years old. Fascinating.
That's a biggie.
Oh,
yeah.
Really big. Really, really big. Okay, we're getting to our last stuff here. If you want to bring up this next picture. Yes, this is... I'm trying to remember the name of this one. Taylor. I think this is the...
Taylor, yeah, it's a Taylor.
Oh, does it say Taylor there?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, Taylor. This is the Taylor track. And this is a human footprint inside of a dinosaur footprint. And so you have the same situation where a dinosaur walked along, stepped in the mud, and then a human came along and stepped right in it. There's where you have superimposed the human footprint there.
You can see it.
Yeah, and you can see the dinosaur one around it,
That's
3
right.
toes up there, right? So
Similar kind of a deal.
yeah, similar kind of a thing. Now this one was mentioned in a conference, in a creationism evolution conference at one time. And they said, we've got this human footprint in a dinosaur footprint. And so during the conference, the creationists got a phone call from the area where this footprint is and said, we got some guys out here with steel rods, and they're like banging away at stuff out here. And they went out there and take a look, and the next slide will show you. Destroyed. They came out and they destroyed it because the evidence was too strong. It was way too much to take. They went out to take a look for themselves. They found it. They found that there was actually human and dinosaur footprint, and they destroyed it to get rid of the evidence. Once again, it's all documented, so no problem. But still, it's a shame that this happens.
Yeah, it is.
It's not just a shame. This is criminal.
It is.
You shouldn't go destroying something that shows wonderful, fantastic, biblical correlation evidence.
Just because it contradicts
because
what you think.
You don't like the fact
you don't like it.
that it shows that the Bible is true.
Yeah.
And so you go and you destroy it. So it's really maddening. This next one is the Elvis Delk print. And what you have here is a dinosaur print on the right. Now this was something a guy found, Elvis Delk. He discovered this and he dug it out in the year 2000. And you can see there's a footprint there at the front of it. Mm-hmm. But he needed some money. The Creationist Museum and the Creationist people were not far from there. So he contacted him and sold it to him. And then they cleaned it all off and they discovered that there was a footprint there once they dug out all the stuff and everything. And so in this one, you have the person that walked along and stepped in the mud, or looks like maybe they were running because their toes are spread apart. And then the dinosaur came along and stepped in it. I think the next one shows it, blows it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's close up.
And so once again, you have a human footprint and a dinosaur print. This was one of the big three-toed carnivore dinosaurs. And you can see, anyway, that you have the two together.
That one's still intact?
Yeah, still intact because it was sold to them and put in the museum.
Yeah.
If it's out at the site, anybody can go out there. If it's not private property.
Yeah.
And
it's just out there in the ground.
Yeah, and you could do something. You find it all the time, not just with that. You find it with the bones. You find it with everything, really. There's no limit to it. If it's creationist type material that corroborates what the Bible tells us, you're going to get people that are messing with it. That's just the nature of the whole thing. We live in a fallen world in a terrible place, and that's what happens.
Right.
Okay. So we've just showed some of the evidence. There's all kinds of this kind of evidence. I mean, we don't have time to go through all the evidence. Yeah. We'd be here hours and hours and hours. But there is tons of evidence that show dinosaurs and humans lived together at exactly the same time. And of course, they did at the time of the flood and even after the time of the flood. Now, we have an interview that we want to play of a guy named Jesse Diaz. And Jesse Diaz was a guy, and well, he'll explain it in the clip. I think it goes about 6 minutes or so, right?
Yep.
And he got to go down and see the dinosaur park. I forget what it's called. Oh, there it is. Yeah, Dinosaur Valley State Park. He got to go down there and check out some stuff because there were some footprints. And I'd like everybody to hear this story because it really shows you the state of how things work.
Okay.
So if you want to play that clip, let's run it now.
All right. Well, my name is Jesse Diaz, and I'm just retired, and I do a little bit of work for senior citizens, and I'm also ordained minister, evangelist. When I remember back in 1972, me and some friends, my brother and a friend of mine that I worked with and some other guys, we used to go fishing all the time. We were over at Granbury, and we weren't doing very good. We weren't catching anything, so we got in the car and started just riding around. We found ourselves in Glen Rose, and someone in the car had read in the newspaper that Dinosaur Valley State Park was going to have a grand opening on that weekend, and that there was going to be, dinosaur footprints and, that kind of stuff. And so we decided, let's go check it out. So we go there. We went down in down in the lower place where the Biloxi River is, and they had dinosaur footprints everywhere, and they also had human footprints and different sizes. Some of the footprints, the human footprints, were regular size, but what stands out in my mind was that there was some great big ones. But I remember there were signs that were pointing to the different tracks, and the different dinosaur tracks and to the human footprints. And they said the names of the dinosaurs that made those tracks. On the human footprints, on the big ones, there was a sign that was pointing to one of the big ones, and it said caveman tracks. But I remember they told us in school that the dinosaurs were first. I think they said 30 million years later, man evolved, but they didn't live together. But what I was seeing there, the footprints told a different story. The human footprints in the dinosaur tracks were side by side, and they crossed. Some of them crossed each other. And I told them to look at this. I said, look at this. And they said, what? It's a caveman track. I said, yeah, but this doesn't go with what we were taught in school. I said, didn't you guys pay attention in biology? And then I went, who cares? My buddies were right. And I turned and walked away. That was in 1972. One day I was reading in Genesis. And I read, I think it's in Genesis chapter 6, where the Bible says that right before the flood that there was giants on earth. And right when I read that, I remembered that footprint that I had seen about 12 years before that. And I told my wife, I got up and I told my wife, it says here that there used to be giants on the earth. We got to go in the car. We got to go. I got to show you these. So we made a beeline for the state park. 12 years had passed since the time that I'd been there with my buddies. And we went, my wife and I, and went down there and we looked and looked and looked. Couldn't find any human footprints anywhere. So go back into the office or there, the area where, the rangers and all the people that work for the park were sitting behind their desks and stuff. And I'd go up to the counter and I said, pardon me. And, talking loud where everybody could hear me in there. I said, what happened to those caveman tracks that y'all used to have out here? And they all looked at me and they didn't say anything. I said, what happened to the human footprints and the caveman tracks that you used to have here? And someone spoke up and said, we never had anything like that out here. I said, oh, yes, you did. Back in 1972. I saw them and my buddies saw them. No, we've never had anything like that. So I left and we were in the parking lot, but there was an elderly gentleman that was inside, and I didn't notice him, but he followed me outside. And he stopped me in the parking lot. He said, I heard what you were saying inside. I heard what you were asking those people in there. He pointed through the woods, and there was a building, a small building, like a shed. And he said, those signs that you said you read, he said, they're in that shed, they're in the woods, that shed, you see it? I said, yeah, I see it. He said, those signs are in that shed. And I asked him, I said, how do you know? He said, I put them there. And I said, you put them there? He said, yes, I put them there. He said, I used to work here back during that time that you're talking about. And yes, you're right, and you're telling the truth. And I'm glad he did because my wife was listening. And I asked him, I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, they took the signs out and they took the footprints. They took them out. And I said, well, then they were here. He said, oh, yeah, they were here. And I said, well, why did they take the human tracks away? He said, because they said that the Indians carved them. And I asked him, I said, well, who carved the dinosaur tracks? And he said, they said that those are real, but the human footprints are fake. But he continued and told me, but that's not the reason. He said, the reason is it doesn't fit their textbooks. He said, this is a Texas-funded state park, and they don't believe that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time. They don't teach that. And if they don't remove the evidence, they're going to have to change all the textbooks, and they're not about to do that.
They're not about to do that.
Nope. There you go.
That's the key thing right there. They're not about to do it.
And I got to say, that interview with him goes for about 35 minutes or something like that.
Does it?
And I cut it because you wouldn't want to listen to 35 minutes.
Right.
But if you look for Jesse Diaz, and if you want to hear the whole thing, he's easily findable on the web.
Yeah.
The Jesse Diaz interview.
Okay.
And you can look it up, you can find it. But so I cut it down for time, just so you can get the gist of the idea.
You get the idea. Yeah.
That's how everything works.
It's interesting.
That's how everything works. He said a state-funded park.
Yep.
And the evolutionary story wasn't being told because you had human tracks there. So first they said, well, those ones were carved, which is nonsense.
But the dinosaur ones were real.
And then after that they said, well, let's just get rid of them, and then nobody has to know even they were here. So people that go now there, you will only see the dinosaur, and there's not a sign of any human because they took them out.
Interesting. Wow.
And this is just the kind of thing that you get continually when you're dealing with the evolutionary story versus the creation story.
It doesn't fit their model.
If it doesn't fit the model, you got to get rid of the
right.
evidence.
That's right. Well,
Or say that it was a different reason or whatever.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this stuff because it's new information. A lot of people probably haven't seen.
Yeah, and it's great information.
It's great information. It's good stuff.
And you got to have this stuff.
It shouldn't be fearful or anything like that. It's just good stuff.
Real good information, and it's real information and true information, and it's the information everybody should have.
Look it up.
Indeed.
Look it up. All right, Mike.
All right.
Thanks a bunch. Have a good one, everybody.